Alright, so general maintenance time. Got new spark plugs. This is the gasket that goes between the intake and the throttle body. This is the intake gasket. These are our valve cover gaskets. We got a fuel filter, an oil filter, a PCV valve, the grommet for the PCV valve, some Permatex, and a new air filter. So it looks like the weather's going to hold out for a few days. So I figured best get to it while the sun is still shining. So step number one is to remove this whole intake assembly just to get it up out of the way. We can start, in reality you could probably just remove up to here. So we can just take these bolts out and take these hosing out, these hose pieces out right here. And that should pretty much do it. And then we'll replace the air filter later. So the idea here is that we'll take this out, we'll take this EGR valve right here off, we'll undo a whole bunch of these bolts and stuff, and then we should be able to lift this upper intake in its entirety up and just put it over here, and then that'll give us access down to that valve cover down there. And we'll go ahead and do both valve covers, obviously, but this is basically just where we get started. So there's the elbow out. Next we got to disconnect this this throttle body here. Also it helps to take the throttle cables off here. I just put the bolts back in where they go. So take the throttle body off. You're going to have two 12-meter bolts up here, and then you're going to have one down here, and then there's one down right there. So once you get those 4 bolts off, this whole assembly will start moving around. And you might have to disconnect a few other things, like this might need to come off and so on, and you can just kind of play with it a little bit until the thing moves out of your way basically enough that you can get this upper manifold off. So there we go. There's one coolant hose right here. There's another coolant hose on the other side down right there, and then there's this TPS plug that needs to come off. And what we're going to do is we're going to take off this other coolant hose right here, and then we're just going to set this whole throttle aside and we're going to clean it. One word of caution here is that when you take this off, it doesn't just fall off. This gasket's kind of sticky, and I've noticed this on a couple of different things. So after you remove all the bolts and you start moving it, trying to move it around and it's not moving, don't freak out. Just give it a good smack down. It should pop right off. If it doesn't pop right off, don't get a hammer, don't get any tools. Make sure all of your bolts are removed. So we're going to disconnect that other line. There's a little bit of coolant that comes out of it, a few drops, not a big deal. Then we're going to set it aside and move on to this main intake. Alright, so there we are. It's totally removed. Make sure you clean this gasket surface over here. And now from here you can see we're actually just removing the top half of this manifold. We're not going to fuck around with the bottom one. We just need this top piece out of the way. And basically at this point you can very comfortably do the driver's side valve cover if you need to. I'm just going to go ahead and wait and do both of them at the same time. So our next plan of attack is this guy right here. This is the EGR valve, and the idea here is to be able to unscrew this down here, and if we can undo this guy down here, we can actually just keep this attached, and when we lift the whole thing off, it's not going to make any big deal out of it. But we'll see. These, you really want to throw some PB blaster or something on them for a few minutes, and then just hit them with the biggest wrench that you can stick in there. It looks to be about a 27mm connection. Basically you just throw that bad boy loose, you just move it down. This is what I ended up using to get it off. All you can really do is soak it in PB blaster and just be gentle with it. I'm really not a huge fan of these cast connections, but sometimes you don't really have much of a choice and you just got to go with it. So it's not too bad. Just give it some time and get that off smoothly. Now we should be able to just go through back here and remove these bolts that hold it to the main manifold. So you got one nut, bolt, nut, and then I guess these bolts go all the way through and hold it. So there should be 6 bolts and 2 nuts that hold this on, and then we should be able to lift it away. If we can't lift it away, then we'll just figure out what else is holding it on, because this is just gonna go over here. But hopefully that should be it. So in the process, there's a few more. There's a horribly rusted coolant line. These two go to the PCV, some sort of air intake bullshit. And then, oh, the fuel rail is also right here. Actually, I might be an idiot. Maybe you don't need to disconnect all these things. Maybe you can just undo this bolt. So I'm going to check to see if I can just undo this bolt before I take off the fuel rail. But this thing is totally loose now, so it should come right up one way or the other. So a little housekeeping. There's a 12mm bolt here I took off. These two lines go over here. I had to take off the fuel line and the fuel vacuum. And then here is our PCV. And I had to take that off as well, but hopefully that's going to give us enough space to do this passenger side valve cover. Because once we do that, we'll put a new gasket down, we'll do the driver's side valve cover, then we'll get this whole thing reassembled. And here you can see it's a little bit of oil up in here, which leads me to believe that the PCV isn't working like it should. We'll find out in a minute when we get that valve cover off. But I'm going to go ahead and clean some of these gasket surfaces and then move on to that passenger side valve cover. So in the end, I ended up undoing this guy from right here, this guy from back there, just to get a little bit more space in there. You really want that whole thing up out of the way, and it's just a few more hoses to reconnect. It won't be too big of a deal, I hope. But now we'll just keep taking bolts out and get that cover off. So there are 11 bolts total. The one odd one is right back here at the very end. But here you can see cams are in good shape, and if you look right back here, you can see where all that oil leak right there was. It's just a big mess. We're gonna clean up the gasket surface, get the new valve cover gasket and RTV and stuff on, and get our torque wrench and get this back on here real quick. So there we go, it's all clean, as you can see. It's very important to get all that gasket material off, and you want to avoid that getting it in the oil. You don't really want this orange shit to go in the oil. And of course, don't forget to get back up here in the front as well. So now I'm going to go ahead and clean the valve cover itself, get a new gasket in there, and some RTV and stuff. Up to this point, this has been by far the worst thing. So this is the PCV valve. You can still hear that it's still kind of working, but if you're going to go through all this trouble, you might as well replace it. Here's our brand new PCV valve, and here's our brand new bushing. The problem is this bushing has turned into like rock hard rubber, and so I basically had to chisel it out, so that was kind of a huge pain in the butt. But we're basically going to put a little oil on it, we're going to put the bushing in, and then we're going to put the PCV in, and then we're going to get our gasket and get this back on the truck. So this is the gasket, this is the gasket maker. I am going to put a little bit between this, this stuff between the gasket and the valve cover, but I wanted to put this in here because it's blue so I can just show you guys. These, there's two of them in the pack, and they are absolutely the same. They go on both sides of the same, but they only go in one specific way. As you can see, one side has a little chink to it right here, and the other side is totally flat. So I'm going to pull this gasket back out. I'm going to put a little gasket maker in there, and then you really want to make sure you seal up these four corners, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you go real heavy right there. And then when we go back, you want to make sure that you torque these down to about 5 pound-feet, no more, because if you torque them down more, it'll end up leaking, I promise. So you really want to be very gentle when you tighten them down. And that's pretty much it. So we're going to get this one back in the truck. In the end, I decided to give it a nice little thin coat everywhere. Paid special attention to the corners. So here's this. Remember, this guy right here at the end goes back there. So now we just got to get it up underneath all the wires, and then we're going to torque it down. I got a torque wrench preset, 1/4 inch torque wrench. So these need to be torqued down to 5 pound-feet, which is 60 pound-inches. So if you have a 1/4 inch, it's probably in pound-inches. There you go. Well, there we go. You can see there's a nice little bead right there. This is solidly in. Everything's been torqued down to 5 Newton meters. You can see our new PCVs right there. So now we can move on to taking off this side. And this one's only going to have 10, I believe. No, it has 11, but on this side, the extra 11th bolt is right up here in the front. So So we're going to go ahead and pull this side off, replace the gasket, RTV. This is also the time you want to go in here and do your spark plugs if you need to do them. I'm going to go ahead and do them on this because I bought them. So you just need a spark plug socket and you can get down there basically. Just the manifold out of the way, it makes it a little easier. Well, I popped the first spark plug and it was brand new, so I guess we're not doing that either. So at this point, you want to clear out any random junk or whatever you might have down in the valley here. I got some paper towels soaking up oil. Do a little bit of cleaning and then we'll get this all put back together. So there's our gasket on there. Now remember, underneath you have this PCV, you have this guy which needs to go up here. So we're actually going to do this, and then this guy needs to attach, and then all of the vacuum hoses obviously, but you want to make sure you do it in the right order, putting it back on, especially those underside connections, because they'll be a pain in the butt to get to later, and you don't want to have to do that. So yeah, make sure you tuck all of this kind of stuff up out of the way so it doesn't get jammed. And let's see. Oh, yeah, you want to make sure you remember to plug your fuel injectors back in if you unplugged them when you were doing the other gasket cover. That would be good. But other than that, that's pretty much it. Let's see. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So we should be able to lower that back down and put those back in place. So there it is back on. Hey, what? A couple of things to keep track of. Remember, you're going to have these 4 bolts over here. You're going to have 2 nuts, 2 bolts down here. Make sure all of your fuel injectors are plugged in. You're going to have this 1 vacuum line left over for the throttle body. You're going to have this coolant hose and this coolant hose back here for the throttle body. And this one's still leaking a bit, that's why it's tucked up there. On this side, you want to make sure that this is plugged in. You want to make sure that you retighten up your EGR, that the EGR is reconnected. There was that coolant hose that ran under here. Over here, you have 1 vacuum fitting right here that goes to this guy, and then there's 2, and they both go to the adjacent one. Make sure your fuel line is back. Your PCV hoses right here, your coolant hose right here. Let's see, you also have this guy. You can put this back on after you get these bolts torqued down. Obviously there's a throttle body to put back in and a couple other little things. But so I started at about 3 o'clock. Right now it's about 6 o'clock. I didn't change the spark plugs because they were brand new, but I did change both valve covers. So you're looking at, and I've never worked on this motor before. I've worked on a crap ton of other motors, but I've never actually worked on a Toyota V6 before. So if you're a novice, you're looking at 3 to 4 hours minimum. If you're a really novice, you're looking at more than that. If you want to do the plugs, it's probably going to be an extra 45 minutes because you got the far plug back over there. It's kind of hard to get to. But all in all, this isn't too terribly bad of a design in terms of getting to stuff. I thought it was going to be a lot worse based on all the bitching and moaning on internet forums and stuff like that. But yeah, and then don't forget your throttle cable, and don't forget this ground that goes right here when the throttle cable is bolted in. That's pretty much it. I'm just going to put the throttle body back on, probably change the air filter and call it a day, and get to the oil change and some other general maintenance tomorrow if the weather holds, or next week or whatever. But this was the big thing I wanted to get done, so this thing would stop leaking oil everywhere. The other thing is, if you sprayed a bunch of cleaning fluid into your oil like I did, make sure you do an oil change like I'm going to, so that you don't have real thinned out oil or whatever going through your motor. But it's all pretty straightforward. There's not really a whole lot of oddities here. You just want to make sure you hook up all the hoses. If you watch the video, you know, just keep rewatching it and make sure that you got everything if you have any concerns. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. So this is pretty much it for replacing valve covers and spark plugs on a Toyota 3-liter V6.